All right, everyone. Welcome. We're going to go ahead and get started, and then anyone else can just filter in um, as they come up. Today we are hosting the fifth, when I say five, fifth MEWS event, the Member Expert Webinar Series, presented by all of you, the members. To really make sure that we are capturing your nonprofit expertise and you can share that to within our community uh, to, strengthen us and make us better. Today we are joined by Jay Weisman of the Legacy Philanthropy Group. He is one of your associate members. Um, The topic today is navigating change in turbulent times. The webinar will run until about 1:45, and then from there on, you can choose to stay on if you have questions. Um, but we are very happy to have everyone here. Thank you to Jay, and thank you to all of you for being continuous members in the New Jersey Center for Nonprofits. Jay, whenever you're ready.
All right. Well, thank you, Emma, and thank you to the center for assembling this group and for inviting me to spend some time with you. I'd like to thank each of you for being here. It's always a privilege for me to be in a convening a room or a Zoom room, if that's what it is, with so many folks who share a common passion to help those in the communities that where we live and work. You wouldn't be here if you didn't care deeply and personally about your organization's mission, and I just want you to know you're appreciated. Um, I plan to make this session pretty interactive, so it's best, or if you're able to join us on camera, that'd be great because I'm going to be asking for raised hands and things like that as we go through this. So I'm going to start um, by showing a little video. Everybody can see that skier. Let's just see how this works. I'm going to bring up a video, and I'm going to ask you to raise your hand either where we can see it or through the reactions, if you sort of feel like this every day, right? As you lead your organization through the times that we're facing. I mean, watch this fella. I think it's a fella,
Wow.
right? So it's quite a bumpy road, and the truth is, nonprofit leadership has never been simple, but it has become noticeably less predictable and more turbulent, if you will. So many of the assumptions we once relied on that the environment around us is stable, planning and even leadership roles are being tested by constant change and increasing complexity. So today's conversation, I want you to keep this in mind, as we go through this. I got to stop the video now, right? But it's just when I saw that, I said, you know what? I think a lot of us are feeling that way. And uh, uh, so, show of hands or reaction, Paul, Jessica,
Yeah,
does it resonate at all? You feel like you got a bump in the road? So,
I feel like the I'm still at the top of the hill getting
still,
ready for all the bumps, but it's good to know, to anticipate that it's going to be a bumpy, rocky road. Yeah.
yeah. And
I
oh, go ahead, go ahead.
oh, my knees are sore just watching this guy go down there.
My back. I used to
Yeah.
be able to do that actually, but
Oh,
not
wow.
any longer. I
Wow.
spent some time
Wow.
teaching skiing, but so
Wow.
it's yeah. So I think it's a good mental image because these are folks that are just trying to get to the bottom of the hill. So there you go. All right, so just a little bit of an introduction of myself here. Legacy Philanthropy Group, been founded about 12 years back. Um, our kind of our motto is creating communities that serve our communities, and I believe that that's pretty much job number one for a nonprofit is to find, identify, and invite people who share their values and share their passion for the mission to be part of their community that in turn goes out and serves the community. So it's community building as well as community serving. And there's two pieces of my business. I work with grant makers and folks, individuals and families that give, but the bulk of my business is on the nonprofit capacity building side. And we have programs where we do board coaching to help board members feel more comfortable in their roles as ambassadors. We do a lot of board governance work, helping structure committees and attract members and structure board meetings, all of that type of thing. And then probably the largest part of our business and where we'll be focusing our conversation today is on the strategic planning piece. So these are all programs designed to help our clients build capacity and deliver more on their mission. We're going to break this down into three sections. So the agenda. So first, we'll talk a little bit about our turbulent times, right? The title today is Navigating Change in Turbulent Times. We'll talk a little bit about what makes that turbulent, and then we'll spend a tiny bit of time talking about mindset and how mindset matters as you um, uh, 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 embrace the opportunities that we have in this environment, and then we'll talk in a little more detail, roll up our sleeves and talk about how to put that mindset in motion. So I'm going to start by just talking about some of the factors of change. And there's one that's not listed here, but Paul, maybe you can relate to that as somebody, as a founder. And that is, for many organizations, there's this constant change that goes on when the founder and the board chair are constantly rebuilding that relationship. Most founders, most executive directors tend to outlast board chairs, especially if those organizations are subscribe to good governance and have a rotation and term limits in that. So it's incumbent on those two individuals who make up a really important relationship to continue to build and develop that. And so that takes a lot of time and effort on the behalf of the staff leadership to continue to build the trust and the communication that makes that successful. Then on top of that, there's this element of change that kind of sneaks up on us as organizations evolve or mature, if you will. They grow, they add staff, they develop more sophisticated systems and practices. And in turn, as they mature, as they go from an initial organization that might have no staff and just a board in its early days to a organization that is beginning to add staff and raise funds, et cetera, all the way to larger organizations, the role of the what they actually need from their board changes. And so their board needs to evolve along with them, both in structure and composition and the roles board members play. The image down there at the bottom, I feel like it helps to think about it that way. That's a image of folks in crew. And so sometimes those board members need to be rowing, and sometimes they need to be steering, and sometimes they need to be looking at the future and doing the mapping and charting a course. And so those roles change over time. And what we need from our board members and who we need to have sitting on our boards tends to change. And that is a challenge for a lot of organizations. Many of my clients come to me because they struggle to get their board engaged at the right level, and we do a lot of work in that area. But always with the idea that, well, you might make an improvement, but that is going to change. You need to be adapting and always realizing that what you need from your board is likely to change, and that may or may not involve uh, uh, evolving the actual members of the board who is on the board. So, yep, you have a question, Paul?
I do have a question, Jay.
Yeah.
Um, we're not at the point where there's any change in the board members. We're just really getting started. I have three board members.
Mhm.
If if the time comes where I want to add another board member, I'm not talking about letting anyone go, but to add another board member,
Yeah.
what's that process? Do the current board members have to vote whether to accept that person, or how does that work?
Well, it's a good question, and it depends, right? And I think that'd be something best to take offline. There's lots of ways to
Okay.
go and find and
Okay.
recruit board
Okay.
members. There's a whole process around identifying the need and what the profile of that person might look like,
Hmm.
identifying those folks, setting their expectations as they come in on the board, right? Is it going to be hands-on or is it going to be hands-off? Onboarding them, coaching them, evaluating the board. There's a whole board life cycle. It'd be a great topic for another MEWS presentation, perhaps, but it's a bit more. But but that whole process of evolving the board, the point is you can't just expect to coach your board and assemble a board and coach it and then expect it to stay the same, right? Because the circumstances and the organization matures, just like a human being. It's an infant, and then and then a baby and a toddler, and then eventually an adolescent and a young adult, and they all have different needs, and we have different needs from our boards as a result.
Okay.
Okay. So another dimension of change so this dimension, it happens kind of subtly, and a lot of times organizations don't realize it while it's happening until things have gotten out of alignment. But something we all I think do notice and see, right, is the and it's probably the most impactful is this element of change that we're feeling so deeply and overwhelmingly in our environment. Has anybody here heard the term VUCA? Have you heard that term before? No?
No.
Jessica, no? Nancy and Angelica, Angela, I'm not sure if you have either. Um, but no, okay. So this is a term that it's been used for a while, became really predominant after 9/11. And the U.S. Army War College actually began using this acronym to describe what was really a substantively different and unfamiliar international security environment, right? Things just got crazy, right? And VUCA stands for volatile, which means there's unpredictability and rapid change. Things don't stay the same for long. Uncertain is the fact that there's often a lack of clear information that makes decision making challenging, right? All the facts are hard to gather and hard to even recognize what the factors are. And there's complexity. So a lot of interconnected elements and factors come into play, partners and stakeholders. It's difficult to predict how a change in one area of your operation will affect other things. And then ambiguity, which is basically this lack of predictability and sometimes some fogginess around what the situations actually are. More frequent misunderstandings arise. So VUCA is this description of a turbulent environment. Does that make sense? Does it feel like a reasonable description of what we're trying to fight our way through at this point? Right? Good. So the VUCA framework really emphasizes the need for adaptability, flexibility, and most of all, strategic agility in navigating change during these turbulent times. So I'm going to land for just a minute on some of the things that impact us. So this turbulence comes from internal and external factors. So the external factors, the top one is no surprise. It's economic, political, legislative policy shifts, right? These are things that are happening in the environment around us. There's increased demand for our services and changing demographics. The survey that the center does every year is a testament to that, right, Emma? It's every year the figures come out and indicate that client expectations are rising, our partner expectations are rising. There's a lot of that internal, external, a lot of that turbulence comes externally, but on the other hand, we're facing increased costs in this economy, funding uncertainties, leadership changes, which we talked about already, challenges recruiting and retaining staff, et cetera, and technology. I'll ask for another raise of hands. Who has been on a webinar that has talked about either AI or cybersecurity in the last, I don't know, 3 months, right? So,
I missed
so,
them.
so the technology is impacting us, Paul.
I missed those webinars. Yeah. I saw them
Oh,
listed. I saw them listed, but I missed them. Yeah.
well, you might be thankful and that you're able to sleep at night. So, it's the technology is a big thing, and how we respond, leverage it, and respond to it being used around us. So I'm not going to linger on this next slide for too long because it's angst inducing, but these are some of the effects, right? All of this change has an effect on our organizations. It's stressful, and our leaders and our staff tend to burn out, and the uncertainty and the confusion, it's just tough. It's hard. It's harder getting through our days for most of us than it used to be. So um, I'm going to stop with the doom and gloom, but that sort of sets the stage, right? We're talking about that turbulence and how we might deal with that. And I want to start and talk about mindset matters, and how that change shows up in our organization. I'm going to start with a quote. Viktor Frankl was a Austrian psychiatrist and philosopher during the 1900s. Kind of a peer of Sigmund Freud in Vienna and all and there. And he had this saying that says, he was quoted as saying, between stimulus and response, there is a space. In that space is our power to choose our response. In that space is our power to choose our response. I used to say things similar to this to my kids when they would come home from school and they were having a hard time or getting bullied. We'd talk about, all right, what happened and how did you respond? And how might you respond? And how you respond to that probably has an influence on whether the bully gets bored and, from not having a fan goes on to somebody else or whatever, right? And this quote is really about agency, about our ability to choose on our own behalf. But we can only choose how to respond to this change if we have the systems and the culture in place to give ourselves options, to give ourselves the ability to think about options. Okay, on this next piece, the VUCA framework emphasizes the need for adaptability, for flexibility, and strategic agility in navigating these times. Frankel tells us that we get to decide how we are going to respond to that change. So I'd like to invite you to think a little more deeply about the idea of managing change and how your organizations respond during turbulent times. So I'm going to go through a list. I'd like you to think about this as a spectrum, and this is how I've seen, and I'm sure you've seen some organizations react. So the first is fear. Some organizations fear change. Change scares them. It creates anxiety in the ranks, and it is not welcome at all, right? It creates anxiety. Not a good situation. I would contend. Some organizations actually resist change. When change happens, they kind of dig in and they push back against the currents that they encounter. They cling to old habits and old ways of doing things, and hoping that the change around them allows them to continue to do things the same way that they have. Yet other organizations um, prepare themselves to react to change. They wait for change to happen, and then they figure out how to respond when they encounter change. So it's reactive, but it acknowledges that change will happen, and they're going to change. They'll deal with it when it happens. Yet other organizations actually anticipate change. They know change is coming. They think about some of the possibilities. They plan ahead and they prepare themselves for change. So they're with the theory that they'll better able to adapt when change occurs. So they don't just wait for it to happen. They think about it. They do scenario planning, what ifs. They go out and survey their stakeholders, et cetera. So they're anticipating that change. Right? But beyond that, some organizations actually embrace change. Think about that for a second, what that might mean. Right? These are organizations that they're going to view change as something that they do well, as a core competency, knowing that the way that they react to change is something that actually sets them apart and maybe even ahead of others in their field. They look at change as, hey, this is going to happen. We are going to build an organization that maybe not quite welcomes change, but kind of welcomes change because they know that it's difficult and it's a challenge, but they're better suited to meet that challenge than others. And that as change occurs around them, they are going to be able to adapt. And then finally, the last point on the scale is the organizations that drive the change. These are the disruptors. Their moves are the ones that the rest of the world, the rest of us really are trying to react to. So I want to well, I just want to sum it up, right? It's about mindset, right? Change can become a core competency. It can be our friend. The other thing I'll say is that that rate of change, well, most people feel like it's accelerating, right? It's changing, faster and faster. The scary part is that as fast as things are changing today, if that rate continues, they'll never change as slowly in the future as they are right now. So this is something where I think it's really important to think about mindset. I'd like everybody to take an opportunity to go into the chat, right, and just enter what you think your organization's relationship to change. How does change land in your organization? And bear in mind, the question is not how do you respond, because sometimes as leaders we respond differently than our organizations. This is how does your organization respond? I'm going to be watching the chat for your inputs. Anyone? So I'm not seeing any. Is Emma? Am I missing something, or are we pretty
I'm
bad?
just writing
I
now.
was still typing. Do you want us
Oh, okay. Oh,
to
okay.
just
Good.
talk?
Okay, good. Yep. Yep.
Okay.
Our team is actively trying to engage and being more open to change. Okay, Angela. Good. Curious to hear what that looks like, and we'll talk about some of the means of doing that. We're on the embrace change, be the change end of the spectrum. Jessica, excellent. What organization is yours? Jessica,
Literacy New Jersey.
Literacy, New
And
Jersey.
because we've reinvented our organization massively in recent years, we've created a culture where change is a positive. But even when you're on that end of the spectrum, right now it's challenging because there's change and then there's change, right? There's
Yeah,
change when you're talking about growth, and then there's change when you're talking about your clients are getting picked up off the streets and
yeah,
disappeared. Do you know what I mean? So
yeah.
it's still very, very
All
challenging to
right, good. Well, I love
plan. Yeah.
we've generally, when I ask this question, very few people will say that they are the change, right? And very few people will admit to fearing change either, but we do see that a lot. And then I think Nancy kind of hit it right on the head. It's hard to say that, answer that question on behalf of the whole organization. It's really individual, and it's definitely sometimes it's departments, and sometimes it's a difference between the board, right, and the leadership team. So I think that that's a really good observation. Paul's still organizing. Change will be ahead, but this is a good time to be, establishing that culture. So,
Yeah,
all right. So I'm
I
going to move
agree.
along and just talk about mindset and motion. I want to go back to this video for a second, and I want you to keep an eye on those skiers. Hang on, let me figure out how to. Let's see. Okay. Keep your eye on those skiers, and I want to, if anybody just to raise hands or or just tell me what do you notice when you watch them coming down the mountain?
He's under control, or she, whoever it is, seems
Yep,
to be under control.
yep,
They have this muscle memory. They've dealt with this before, and they know how to
yep,
handle it.
yeah. That's I think that's very accurate. Anything else?
They have no fear.
Well, I don't know, they channel that fear.
Yeah,
All right, here's what I want you to look at. I want you to look at them from the waist up, and then look at them from the waist down. It's a giveaway, but what do you see?
yeah, interesting.
Angela in the chat says that he's bracing for impact.
He is
They're
bracing for
actively
impact,
doing things.
actively doing things, right? I'm gonna take this. Yeah, I think I'm gonna take it back again while we talk.
It looks
Right?
like they're staying calm from the waist up. All the
Exactly.
movements are with the
E-
legs, and they're staying
Exactly.
relatively straight.
Exactly.
Yeah.
It's from the waist up. It is shoulder square, eyes down, unwavering focus, completely steady, looking down at the goals ahead, which is the bottom of the mountain. Right? That's
Mm,
the waist up. It's almost perfectly still.
yeah.
From the waist down, all hell is breaking loose. It's constant adapting to the terrain and the conditions, right? It is, I mean, it couldn't be more violent and bumpy and lumpy and right. So, and actively doing things, right? As we see in the bracing for impact, absorbing the irregularities of the environment. So it's I just love the analogy, and I'm an analogy guy, so I invite you to love it along with me or not, but I'm going to stop it for now. But it's to me, I think it's just a great way of thinking about how we have to lead our organizations. We have to stay focused. We have to have our North Star. We have to know what we stand for and who we are and what we want to accomplish, right? But we also need to build in the muscle memory and the skill to adapt as we go to what is, I mean, those bumps and those jumps can administer lumps if you're not prepared for it, right? All right. So let's do just a quick raise of hands. Who has a current strategic plan in place? And I want you to keep your hand up if you do. All right, good. Um, who's looked at that strategic plan in the last year? Keep your hand up if you have. Good. In the last 6 months? Oh, you guys are good. Last 2 weeks? All right, good. Well, that's excellent, right? I would say the vast majority of folks, when I've done this talk, the hands go up and then they start to come down because strategic planning for many organization is the planning itself is not a challenge, but the strategic leadership is. And we're going to talk about strategic planning and how it's changed. Because for most organizations, strategic planning, the traditional approaches to strategic planning, um, they let us down kind of when we need them the most. They don't fit our reality. Their difficult plans are too difficult to develop. They're rigid, they're time consuming, and for many organizations, they're focused on producing the document, the plan. And folks go set out to do a 3 or 5 year plan. And we talked about the VUCA environment. The assumptions we make going in rarely are valid 3 years or 5 years from now, much less 3 months from now. So strategic plans take time and energy to create, but often they're rendered irrelevant by the events nobody could have predicted. So um, I feel like the greatest risk in strategic planning is not getting the plan wrong, but the real danger lies in clinging to the approaches that we've done in the past. So I'm going to talk a little bit about some different ways of thinking about strategic planning. Right. This is a challenge. I make this challenge in many of my presentations, but it's really about this idea of if you want to change the status quo, change how things are working in your organization, and either take things that are challenging and improve on those, or take things that are working well and make them better, striving for excellence. You just need to do something different. You need to elevate your game. You need to think differently about the challenges that you face, and you need to take different actions. And I would suggest that each one of you has the ability and the opportunity to challenge yourself to be an agent of change. Paul, we'll talk about reviewing the strategic plan in a minute. So thank you for
Okay.
that question. Yeah, and sort of iteration. We'll talk about that in a minute. But
Okay.
we talked about this. This is my challenge: is if you want to change the status quo, you need to act differently and think differently. But I think it's worth defining status quo. And I'm going to turn to a sage, Ronald Reagan, who said, "Status quo, Latin for the mess we're in." Right? A little bit humorous, right? We talked about changing the status quo, and I think Reagan says it best, but it is entirely possible that we'll be starting from a good place, wanting to make it a better place. And I saw a lot of hands raised that folks are using their strategic plans. So let's think about how we can now uh, uh, up our game, change our mindset to rethink strategic planning. And so we're going to talk about six different aspects of strategic planning. We're going to talk about adaptive planning, iterating. So, Paul, kind of how, revisiting your strategic plan and what that looks like, focusing on outcomes. So we'll talk about outcomes in a minute, challenging assumptions, committing to innovation, and then actually putting the plan to action. So we'll revisit this slide as we work through the last part of the agenda here. So adaptive planning. We talked about VUCA and how a quickly changing environment makes it difficult to operate, right? And the challenges that it introduces to the strategic planning process is because for the most part, strategic planning, at least in the past, has been, where are we today? Where do we want to be in the future? What steps and what sequence are we going to take to get there? And then we set off with a 3-year plan to do that, right? It assumes that there's stability and that we have control. It assumes linearity. Um, it depends on our ability to make long range forecasts, which is increasingly hard to do. And typically, strategic plans are front end loaded. We spend a lot of time trying to think about things and make assumptions and everything else, and then spend a lot less time with those validating those assumptions and assessing the environment, 6 months, a year, or 2 years down the road until we're ready to do our planning again. And then finally, a predictive planning. This is about mindset too. It's typically people go back to that plan that they created, and they measure their success by how well they checked off the boxes and stuck to that plan, right? Part of this whole theory and this contention is that those plans need to change. They need to be adaptive. They need to value flexibility over fixed outcomes. They need to reward learning and in an iterative process, responding to real-time changes, dynamic stakeholder engagement. So continuing to engage with our stakeholders and validate our strategies and our goals. And then success, not necessarily measured by, 3 years from now against what we thought we would do 3 years ago, but measured by our resilience and our agility and our ability to measure our impact. So that's the adaptive planning piece, right? It's a mind shift change with respect to how we go about planning. The iterative piece, how often we should review the plan, speaks to iterating, right? It helps to think about the planning as an iterative process, and it's sometimes called emergent strategy. There's some key things about this, right? One of the things is it frees us up to plan in shorter, quicker chunks. We don't get bogged down trying to incorporate everything at the outset. Can't tell you how many organizations want to go out and interview all of their funders and all their different stakeholders and all their partners as a prelude to doing strategic planning. In our theory, we feel that most organizations have enough domain expertise and situational knowledge to at least come up with that first iteration of the plan. Then they have something to go out and validate with their funders and with their supporters and with their clients, as opposed to just going out and saying, hey, what should we be and what do you need? It's more like, hey, this is the thought process we've been through. This is what we're thinking as a starting point, something to validate. But that takes much less time. It gets you to a point where you're actually talking about tangible goals and strategies right from the get-go. So you can drill down as you go and go deeper into scenario planning and stakeholder validations. As you look at this image, right, one of the things it's really key is that over time, some strategies aren't going to work out, or some strategies you might accomplish. So maybe one of your strategies is to revamp your website. Well, you check that box off. Then one of the other strategies that you didn't necessarily prioritize, then you can promote that and focus on that. And this all ties into sort of the idea that a lot of folks do go out in strategy, and we love the idea of thinking big and dreaming big, but you have to get real. You might come up with in a brainstorming session 30 different things that you might do. There's probably only 4 or 5 or 6 that the organization can actually concentrate on. So what are the most important things to concentrate on? The rest of those still valid, but they might be second tier, and they might be those part of that emergent strategy. So as you accomplish things, or as the world around you changes, you need to be able to adapt, add things and subtract things. And 3 years down the road or 2 years down the road, the realized strategy is very likely to be different than what you started out with when you put the stamp on the plan. So it's about shortening the cycles, and making strategic strategy part of your everyday mindset. Should show up at every board meeting, at every staff meeting. To talk about is I think the one that's most important is focusing on outcomes. So I'm going to use another quote from Dwight Eisenhower. He says, "Preparing for battle, I've always found that plans are useless, but the planning is indispensable." And what he's talking about is that it's strategic thinking that counts. The plans themselves are a great way to bring the team together and build that culture. It's really an outcome of the process as opposed to an output. So does anybody have a logic model for their organization? Okay. So a logic model is pretty common. It just talks about what are the inputs to a process. A lot of organizations use this to talk about how they bring about change. What's the input to the process? What are the activities? What do we do? What do we output? And then what is the impact? Right. And so when we talk about strategic planning, I would just encourage you, the activities are the SWOT analysis and clarifying vision and mission and everything else. The outputs are that strategic plan, that binder, and it might also have an implementation plan and a communication plan. Those are the things that come out of the process. But the outcomes and the things that I think are really important to focus on, right, are the outcomes. The process of strategic planning and how it helps align the board and the staff, how it improves, builds muscles within the organization to think strategically and make decisions and solve problems. Okay. So the last two things I'll just touch on, I won't go into detail, but is around this idea of challenging assumptions. So we talked about the status quo. It's really important to have discipline around challenging and questioning habits and assumptions that you've made over time. So some habits serve us well, but others outlive their usefulness and can hold us back and they can harm us. So let's invest in what's currently working and let's abandon what's not. Another key piece is commitment to innovation. So foster a bias towards action. If you wait for the obvious answer and for clarity and for every eventuality to be considered, the situation is going to change before you have a chance to respond. So reward curiosity and experimentation. Be willing to fail, and then if you do fail, own it and have the discipline to realize that that's what a learning organization does and have the discipline to analyze. All right, the very final thing I'll talk about is putting your plan into action. So I would imagine many of you have seen the strategic plan that does a really good job of talking about mission and vision, and it has a number of themes and goals and strategies. But after that, that's where it ends. It's really important to operationalize that to make sure everybody in the organization understands tactically what they need to do to make those strategies happen. So an action plan is really, really important. It identifies ownership. It builds ownership of the and alignment around the mission. And it also helps you determine how progress will be measured and reported on. And we talk about a difference between metrics and indicators, but one is what day-to-day folks on the front lines are using to track their progress, and the indicator is more about the level of abstraction that the board needs to be comfortable that things are going as intended, but not feeling uncomfortable enough so that they need to kind of get down into the weeds and micromanage. All right, so last two slides. So strategy needs to be really ever present. So we talked about this already. It should show up. It's not put it on the shelf. It should show up every day. And ultimately the goal, right? We talked about the skiers. Another sports analogy, which I don't often use, but there's two here today, is this idea of preparing our organization like you prepare if you're a boxer. You need to be resilient. If you're a boxer, you need to be able to take a punch. You're going to get punched, right? But at the same time, you need to be agile so that you can avoid most of those things that are coming at you. And then every once in a while, one of those punches gonna land and knock you to the ground. And you need to have that grit to pick yourself up, dust yourself off, and continue on. So the key takeaways for today are these. We live in a VUCA environment. It's marked by uncertainty, change, and rapid change, and it's getting a little more hectic as we go. Every organization, though, gets to define its relationship to that change. And as we think about how we're going to tailor our organizations, right, we want to think about working together, our executive team and our board leaders to shift our organization's mindset to a culture that allows them, that builds the muscles to be adaptable and think strategically and make great decisions. So with that, I'm going to wrap up. This is our call to action, an invite. If you'd like to either scan the QR code, Emma's going to put that link into the chat momentarily. And also, I think an email is going to follow with the link. Is that right, Emma?
Yes, Jay, thank you so much for speaking today. It is 1:45, so I do have to release people.
Yeah.
So the link will go out if you're not up to scanning the code, or if you would prefer a hyperlink instead. It will go out in the follow-up email. Again, this is the MEWS presentation for the recording. Jay Weisman has presented on navigating turbulent times. Thank you everyone so much for coming and for the support that you continue to give all of us.